I think she's referring to incense.
Welcome everyone to Contemporary Issues Sunday School class. We are glad to have you here. And we are so pleased to have our guest speaker today, Rev Glen Wood, a longtime St. Andrew member and also a new associate pastor at Smoky Hill United Methodist in Centennial, which is also a reconciling and welcoming congregation, much like St. Andrew. So I thought it would be wonderful to talk to Glenn today about his journey as a pastor and what he thinks about Methodism today. So we're looking forward to that. Our usual announcements first. Zoomers, welcome. Nice to have you here. And please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube for those who can't be here today. And other announcements. Vicki has a card that she's going to pass around. A sympathy card for a couple of our class members, Mitch and Carla Hankins, who lost a daughter this week. And so we are keeping them in our prayers. And the Vacation Bible School, we want to give a little plug to. Is it in June? July? It's in July.
Yeah.
But it'll be Seniors Vacation Bible School for speaker for seniors. Yeah. Do we have senior moments? And but there'll be lots of good presentations by our pastors and others. So it's a fun thing to do. Sign up online. Okay. Any other announcements? Things that people welcome back from traveling people. I know Eric's been in around the Southwest of the Americas. And Peter's been traveling in Europe. And anybody else have a big trip coming up? Betty?
Watched the Good Luck, Good Night.
Oh,
Yes.
Good night, good luck.
Yes.
Play that was live last night. On
Excellent.
CNN.
Wonderful.
The journalists are speaking out that they are going to start demanding freedom of speech.
George Clooney Broadway play that was broadcast last night. Yeah, first time ever that a Broadway play was broadcast live, so quite interesting.
He got emotional at the end.
Oh, did he? Very good. Okay, I want to read a little bit, quick bio about Glenn. And Glenn joined Smoky Hill as part-time associate pastor starting last July. He's a graduate of St. Paul School of Theology in Kansas City, and he is an ordained elder on honorable location, it's called, from the Missouri Conference. Rev Glen and his partner, Robert Wagner, who lived in Illinois for 20 years, they have a Scottish terrier named Maggie McGinnis, who puts the tea in trouble. Glen's hobbies include traveling, supporting the arts, singing with various choirs, cooking, and spending time with family and friends. And he's been a longtime member of the St. Andrew Choir here, too. So with that, please welcome Glenn. Glenn has a little slideshow to show and tell us a little about his journey. And when I ask him questions about Methodism and about Smoky Hill, learn about that reconciling congregation. But first, I asked him if it was okay if I shared with him, as I did in my email to you, the post that he put on Facebook recently about a hate mail that he got from a parishioner. Is it a parishioner at Smoky Hill?
Actually, it was a person who's been sending around a lot of hate mail to a lot of
to different clergy. Okay, so not necessarily parishioner.
Right.
But Glenn wrote, I received my first piece of hate mail by someone who actually placed their name and return address on it. I could have ignored it and thrown it away and moved on. And normally, hate mail is sent to me anonymously, which is immediately trashed. But since this person put his name on it, I responded. In essence, it said, because you're gay, you should repent of your sin. You're going to hell. And of course, this person didn't know me or my partner, anything really apparently about scripture or church history about LGBTQ people. I thanked him for his concern, but respectfully disagreed. I quoted John Wesley himself, who befriended a gay man in prison, the story which is often conveniently overlooked, and briefly lifted up the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, about David and Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi, stories that are also frequently overlooked. As you can imagine, this person's mind was made up. He didn't want to be confused with the facts, but I suppose I needed to have this argument not to change his mind, but to somehow reassure myself that the word is not made up of how we want it to be, but that it is created the way God intends. So wanted to ask Glenn about that and how often that happens with you as an openly gay man and pastor, and how it makes you feel to respond to that kind of thing.
Well, it's kind of complicated because one of the reasons that I went out of ministry back in Missouri was basically coming to terms with my own sexual orientation and not really having a good off ramp at the time of doing that, especially with the conference being so caught up in all of the fear mongering and everything. And I knew I was not the only gay clergy in the United Methodist Church. I have lots of friends who remained in the closet, who were pastoring churches and whatnot, but I was working with a Narcotics Anonymous group, and many of the people in that group, the issue wasn't the drug abuse or the alcohol abuse. The issue was more about trying to be their true, authentic selves. And a lot of times, drug and alcohol abuse is used as a way to medicate, to cover up from dealing with those true feelings. So I just felt like the biggest hypocrite in the world, trying to be a pastor. I was trying to date at the time, and I thought it was going to be extremely unfair to try to have a relationship with a woman that I just didn't have the feelings for, or were trying to have feelings that just weren't there. So it's been a long journey here through all of this, because I took honorable location just because I didn't want to be a distraction. I didn't want to really be a poster child for all the conflict and the battle going on. And there's been so many clergy and so many people who've lost their ordination or lost their congregation. And what's ironic about it was the church that I was pastoring at the time, which is now a satellite campus of Church of the Resurrection. They were open about being a reconciling congregation. And when I spoke to my district superintendent and people in the church about that, it's like, well, we just really don't want a new church startup out of the gate being a reconciling church. So there was just a lot of politics, a lot of division and all of this. So since we, fast forward now to where we are now, fortunately, the language is gone in the Book of Discipline. And we affirm the dignity and well-being of all people, which is huge, which is something I think should have been a no-brainer years ago. But as it is, I think I wanted to come back into this and try to have a sense of honesty and openness that I wasn't allowed to have, 25 years ago. And so when I received this letter, I just found it strange that he had his email and his phone number, his physical address, everything on this envelope. And I brought this up to other people on the staff, and it's like, oh yeah, this guy's a whack job. He's, he's sending this out to everybody who knows Karen Oliveto, Bishop Oliveto.
Yeah.
And, God bless Bishop Karen. She is a tremendous person who I have a lot of admiration and respect for. The death threats and everything that she went through. And Smoky Hill was actually the church where she had her offices located. So if you come to Smoky Hill, we've got more security there than you do here.
Really?
There's cameras everywhere and the doors are locked all the time.
Where's that
Pretty
physically
much.
located?
Smoky Hill is, let's see, it's Centennial. It's just right on the border of Aurora and Centennial. And it's off of Smoky Hill Road. It has a history of, I guess, back in the day, all of that was wilderness out there.
Yes.
And they kind of adopted the Pioneer wagon as their logo for being out in Kansas, and now everything's built up around it. But anyway, Smoky Hill has long been a United Methodist church, and they decided to become a reconciling congregation. And I was actually attending there when they were having that discussion. And because they weren't a reconciling congregation, kind of gave me pause to look elsewhere. And I was singing with the Denver Gay Men's Chorus, which your congregation hosted. And I think that was my first introduction here to this congregation. And then Mark Zwilling, of course, being the director of the Denver Women's Chorus, which is now the Denver Feminist Chorus, was another opening. And so my partner and I started coming here. Robert's Catholic, and of course I'm Protestant. But we just kind of fell in love with the church here, and love the message that comes from the pastors. And this is a good place to be. There needs to be more St. Andrews in the world. And so anyway, getting back to Smoky Hill at the time we were coming here was going through an internal struggle. And they lost members when they had the vote to become a reconciling congregation. And I was fortunate in that they had an associate pastor before I was there, who is part of the queer community. They have a strong Rainbow Alliance. So after they became a reconciling congregation, they made a commitment to have gay clergy on staff. And when Farron was moving on to a different situation, they still wanted to have a presence on staff. And so all of this was happening really fast. They had just voted for the Book of Discipline to change. I had a conversation with Bishop Oliveto and asking, what would it take to come back to ministry? And she said, well, Smoky Hill has got an associate position that's just opened up. You might want to try that, dip your feet back into the water and see how you like it. And so rather abruptly and quickly, like in the course of 2 weeks, I go from attending here at St. Andrew to being associate pastor at Smoky Hill. And it's been great. The church is great. It's warm and friendly, and they have a huge commitment to social justice issues. I don't think I've ever been part of a church that hasn't had more of their members involved in some kind of social action cause. It's really tremendous what they do there. But that being said, because of the bishop's office there and the church also flies a rainbow flag, and we do it all year long, not just for a Pride Month too. So I get this wonderful letter, and he's no stranger. I think he's written letters to every clergy, United Methodist clergy in the state of Colorado and Wyoming.
Wow.
So I was told, ignore it, forget him. It's not important. And I thought, yeah, but he wrote his phone number and so, yeah, so I engaged him. I sent an email first and he responded and I got his phone number. So I called him up and I said, do you want to talk about this?
Good for you.
And he started crying. And I'm like, are you all right? You know, what's going on? And he said, well, you know, you're the only clergy person who has responded to me.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, okay, why do you think that is? And, you know, just dead silence, lots of tears coming down, and I'm asking, are you okay? And again, you know, silence and everything. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, why would someone take all of the time,
Yes.
effort, and energy to look up every United Methodist pastor in the state of Colorado and to write these letters? And I don't think he's doing it just to the United Methodist Church. He's also doing it to other congregations and churches that are reconciling and open and affirming congregations. And so there's a part of me that in my own journey of coming out, in my time where I was trying to avoid coming out, that I wasn't really wanting to deal with my own personal attitude. I was the best homophobic pastor you could imagine. You know, so because if I didn't have to deal with other gay people, then I wouldn't have to deal with myself. So part of my mind is like, is he struggling with his own sexual orientation? And I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I can't make those claims and whatnot. But I made it very clear to him that there are other passages of scripture that do not support your opinion, and that I'm going to pray for you as you are praying for me, that you'll be okay. And that my understanding is that God loves everybody. And so, and again, you know, dead silence, very long pause. And in the letter, he also sent a bunch of tracts, you know, about repenting and, you know, the typical things. When I walk around the church, I found him here at times, you know. There were times I come to choir practice or whatnot, and you find somebody who's more conservative leaving tracts around, you know, as a way to save your soul. So so anyway, that's still going to happen. I don't think I changed his mind, but I did it more for myself because I can't let this continue. I don't think we can afford to let this hatred and bigotry and self-hatred in some cases continue. And I don't know, when you come across somebody who is very adamantly opposed against the gay agenda or being woke or whatnot, we just don't know what that person is going through. We don't know what they're struggling with. But I wanted to make it clear that I don't agree with the homophobic language. I don't agree with the hate stuff. And I believe that there is an alternative path. And I believe, and I don't want to get into an argument about the 6 gotcha passages that are in the Bible over same-sex attraction. But what I do want to do is lift up the other passages of scripture that are affirming. The Ethiopian eunuch in Acts being a huge one, and the fact that the Bible is full of loopholes. The Bible is not a one-note document. It is a collection of different people viewing God differently and having that put into dialogue. So I think my whole agenda here for coming back to this is, first of all, I do love the church. I love I love people. You've got to love people. You just don't get into this if you hate people. Or if you hate people, then there might be another agenda.
Yeah.
There might be self-adulation or something. And I think, we talk about narcissistic behavior. Pastors are pretty narcissistic people at times. Not all of them are, but you can go down that rabbit hole. But I think that if you really love and care about people, you have to share what's on your heart, and you have to create safe places for that dialogue to happen. And we need to talk. And right now, we're not talking with each other. There's a huge effort to shut down anyone who doesn't share a conservative, narrow point of view. And this has been going on for a long time. So should we?
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. For reaching out to that guy,
Right.
the only one that reached out to him, that's a powerful testimony on your part.
Well, I will say this. One of the big things that have changed in the time that I've been out of ministry, it kind of breaks my heart, the number of pastors who have unlisted phone numbers. This is huge. I mean, the death threats and the things that Bishop Karen received and other clergy receive them. And I used to get hate mail back when I was doing ministry in Kansas City. But I never got, the threatening phone calls. I never got swatted. I never had the anger or the hatred. At least people would do it anonymously. Well, right now, there's people out there that it's kind of scary. And even the work that I've done with the volunteer Aurora Police Department, with their Citizens Academy and whatnot, we used to be able to go and knock on doors. If a child was missing, we would knock on doors and say, have you seen this kid? And, if you have, can you please call this number and whatnot? Well, City of Aurora has decided that's too dangerous. They no longer have volunteers to go knock on doors because you just don't know when you knock on a door if someone's going to, have a gun with them. So, yeah. So now, I find it sad because I think a lot of clergy go into this wanting to help people and to be there for people, but the boundaries of having an unlisted number or, calling the church main number and then having the call filtered, having it looked at as, okay, do we know this person? Are they safe to talk to? And even having someone just, sitting in their car in the parking lot becomes a security issue, so.
That's the world today.
Yeah.
Yep. We've got about 35 minutes left. I want to allow Glenn to show his slideshow here and tell us a little more about what he does at Smoky Hill.
Sure.
So let me do share screen here so our Zoomers can see the slides also. And we'll do this. Okay, can you just tell me when you want to go on to the next slide, Glenn?
Yeah, why don't we start with my favorite minister or pastor,
Okay.
the Honorable Reverend Jerry Falwell.
Oh.
The first time I knew that I was in trouble was listening to this man speak. And I think a lot of the issues that we are dealing with now have been building for a long, long, long time. And
Yes.
when he formed Liberty University and got into bed with politics, and here's something that you might find interesting. I was actually a registered Republican at one time. This is why I left the Republican Party.
Well,
Be-
they used to be, they would be considered liberals now,
Right.
the old Republicans.
Right. So anyway, when Jerry Falwell came into prominence and developed this huge following, and a lot of Trump's current base was built by this guy. And also one of the major hurdles for me doing ministry at Smoky Hill is a lot of LGBTQ people and a lot of people who are burned by conservative theology. They identify Christianity by this gentleman. Okay? Sexist, racist, homophobic, God ordained it. And how do you fight that? How do you compete against that? So I think a lot of the issues and things that we are dealing with now have started a long, long time ago. And at first, his big thing was starting Liberty University. And many of the people who have gone through Liberty University are people who are now on Trump's.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people went into public office who have come through Liberty University. And I can't think of the name of the conservative organization with the Supreme Court. I can't think of their name. I'm sorry?
You're talking about maybe the Federalist Society?
Right. I mean, there's ties there and all of that. And then also Asbury Seminary. And growing up in Missouri, I was actually, being the white male that I am, and evangelical in a lot of ways. And evangelical used to be Wesley was evangelical.
Yeah.
Because evangelical means sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, So I'm totally on board with that. And then when people started looking at me like, oh, you're one of those evangelicals. I'm like, that's a bad thing? Well, to a lot of people it is. And a lot of the hatred that we get from people who aren't evangelical, who are out there who don't want to step foot in the door, this is what they view as Christianity. And there's a sense of hatred, there's a sense of vindictiveness, and it's just tragic how, at one time, someone said like there's 122 different Baptist denominations. And not all of them agree or, whatnot. But if you didn't like one, you could find 121 others, But there has been this push, to consolidate and to push back against liberal thought and liberal thinking, which Liberty University was set up to do, and now they just don't want to have their own university. They want to just get rid of public education, altogether. So, but this is what I grew up with in the Midwest, this conservative thought. And Methodism was kind of the only beacon out there that had something different. And then Asbury came along with their conservative theology that was kind of on board with Falwell. And so I always like the saying that you've got written on the wall, the quotes from Wesley, we don't have to think alike to love alike. And so for decades, we developed this tolerance of, okay, you can think differently, and that's okay. We just don't have to agree with you. And I think there has been decades of us not holding people accountability to the hate and vindictive nature of coming across with this attitude that Christ is okay with this, And when United Methodist Church had its own struggles with the LGBTQ acceptance, everything seemed to be fine before 1950 or 1940. I think the 40s is when the Lavender Scare and Hitler and, the pushback against homosexuality, all of that started. before that, there's a rich legacy. There's a lot of people who are LGBTQ who made an impact on the Christian faith. And so this idea of sanitizing and washing and cleansing and getting rid of LGBTQ history because we're not comfortable with it, or it doesn't support our own theology or what we want to believe. We've lost a lot because we've been tolerant, not wanting to hold people accountable. Or if we do hold them accountable, they walk out. So I'm not sure how we go from that.
And lose part of your congregation if you speak up.
Right. So what we've done in essence is we've sacrificed a lot of LGBTQ people to appease, this radical right agenda, which is unfortunate. And I think that as the church has declined and has been losing members, we're getting more and more desperate, trying to figure out how do we get people back in the door. So anyway, the culture wars are real. It's a real thing, and we're in the middle of it. I had a listing here of people I've been reading. Let's go to that, and then I'll come back to Chris Hedges and some of these. These are people that I'm reading currently now that help me deal with our current environment. I just love Rachel Held Evans. She is an evangelical a Christian. Unfortunately, she's passed away. If you haven't read her books, I would encourage you to do so. With her passing, I don't know how many of her books are out there or whatnot, but I would recommend keeping one on your shelf. She later moved to, I believe it's Presbyterian Church, I think. No, I say that wrong. Not Presbyterian. Good grief. St. John's Cathedral. Episcopal, yeah. So she moved to the Episcopal Church, but she started off as an evangelical Christian. And when she started actually reading the Bible, she figured out things weren't exactly like she was being told. And so when she started asking questions and she started reading scripture and started asking, well, what does this passage of scripture mean? If you're quoting this passage, what does this mean? She started holding evangelicals accountable for what they were saying. And a lot of people who had left the church, she started bringing back in. And, more conservative churches, or not conservative, more traditional churches like the Presbyterian Church and I can't think of the name again. Episcopal. Right? And that's where we have our history. Our roots as Methodists is with the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
So, and now that we've changed our polity, we can now have full union with the Episcopal Church. So, there's discussions now about being able to have clergy exchanges and whatnot between the different denominations. So anyway, those churches have kind of seen a resurgence based on her writing and her, people leaving the evangelical church to go back to more traditional churches. Mike Rowe is also another person who has helped me out quite a bit. We've got a huge vacuum in the United Methodist Church in that we've got a lot of educated people. The probability of everyone in this room having a high school or undergraduate degree or master's degree is pretty high. There are a lot of people who are lucky to have a high school diploma. And Mike Rowe, of course, you probably have heard of him in Dirty Jobs.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things he has raised the red flag on for a long time is that we have forgotten how to care for and do outreach to people who don't have a degree. That we have kind of left people who work in the trades to fend for themselves. And I brought that up too, Smoky Hill gives out scholarships for kids to go to college. And I'm like, are we giving out any scholarships for someone to get their trade school license or whatever? And I've actually supported several people who needed to get, because they can't afford to get their licensing, to be an electrician or a plumber.
Mike Rowe has a PBS show called Dirty Jobs, where he advocates people to go to trade schools and shows what they do, and really has kind of a ministry to that purpose.
So when you talk about the future of the United Methodist Church, I think we need to find a path forward that embraces everyone. Because I'm afraid that too many of people who are in the trades, they feel like they've been left out. They feel abandoned. Not everybody can get a degree. And I think part of the rift that we saw from this last election was the fact of, forgiving everyone their college debt and making college affordable. Well, people who don't want to go to college or can't go to college, that's just salt in an open wound. I think that's been a huge mistake that the Democratic Party has made. So we've got to find a way to include everyone and not think that the only path forward is, getting an undergraduate degree. I also am a big fan of James Himmel. He has a new book out. He's the hot topic right now, The Science of Revenge. If you haven't heard of him or heard of this book, I would encourage getting a hold of it. He is hitting the nail on the head a lot of ways. His background is he used to be an attorney. And so he knows a lot about revenge. And there's a difference between justice and revenge. Revenge is, I'm going to get back at you. And one of Trump's campaign slogans, I am your revenge.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Well, that struck home to a lot of people. He's also a recovering, he calls revenge an addiction. And we've got a lot of addiction issues as a church we need to get our arms around. I think that needs to continue. And then, of course, I like Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges can be a little bit dark, and he will admit to that. He is kind of pessimistic about where things are going. I'm not as pessimistic as he is about stuff, but he is an ordained
The future
minister.
of Methodism or Christianity?
Well, the future of our country.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a political commentator who has a background in theology. And so he combines the two pretty well. But he's kind of doom and gloom.
Okay.
If he hasn't worked out more so than normal. But I think he makes some good points about what we need to do to change. If we are going down a hole that we can't return from.
For him.
But my favorite person is at the moment Benjamin Kremer, who he was Church of the Nazarene. And he grew up in a very, very conservative, highly toxic charged environment of Christian hate, and became a minister as Church of the Nazarene. He's pastored some United Methodist churches, though. He's very liberal and open in thought, and he's getting a lot of heat for it. But he's a survivor. That's the thing that I like about reading his stuff. When people hit him with different comments, he has an answer. And I wanted to share with you, if I can pull it up. And the issue here is he's been getting beaten up quite a bit. He had someone respond to him one person's compassion is another person's coddling sin. And conservatives are yelling at us like, well, we're just coddling sin by having empathy and care and compassion. And I want to share this and then I'll shut up.
No, we don't want you.
Well, recently someone commented on a post of mine where I was emphasizing our need to care more about cruelty than we do about people being too compassionate. The commentator wrote, "One man's compassion is another man's coddling sin. By all your writing, it's clear that you're coddling sin." Another commenter chimed in right after to say, "Too much compassion towards certain people is a form of cruelty, as it allows immorality and dependency to run rampant." This is what we're facing. This morning while we're here together in our bubble where everybody loves each other, we've got good, loving Christians ready to, take us out to the woodshed. On the surface, it may appear to be wise warning against moral and theological laxity, but beneath the surface, this sentiment reveals a troubling departure from the heart of the gospel and the example of Jesus Christ. In fact, when held up to the light of the cross, this idea not only distorts the nature of compassion, it fundamentally misunderstands what it means to be Christ-like. Jesus died for everyone, including sinners. Let's begin with this central truth. Jesus Christ died for everyone, including sinners, as Paul writes in Romans 5, verse 8. But God shows his love for us, and while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus' ultimate act of love and compassion came not after repentance, not after behavior modification, and certainly not in response to moral purity, but while the world was still in sin. The cross is not God rewarding the righteous, but God entering the depth of human brokenness and rescuing even the most unworthy. That is what grace looks like. So if we apply the logic of this sentiment to Jesus himself, we are forced to conclude that he coddled sin by loving and dying for everyone, especially for sinners. By this standard, Jesus showed too much compassion when he ate with tax collectors and sinners, when he extended mercy to the thief on the cross, without him saying first, "I repent of my sin," and asked God to forgive those who were nailing him to the cross, even though they weren't asking for forgiveness at the time. By this logic, the gospel itself is dangerously permissive.
It's beautiful.
So I love this guy.
Yeah, see why.
So
Dr. Tom Ward has a similar background.
Yeah.
He came out of the Nazarene,
right.
or actually was blacklisted from the Nazarene church.
Well, and so is he. There are a lot of Nazarenes now, and you've hosted a few here, with, yeah,
Dr.
yeah,
Yeah.
with progressive.
Thank you for sharing that. That was powerful.
So that's where I'm at, is basically that, I don't know how we are on time.
We got 15 minutes.
Oh, wow, we're doing great then. Well, there's other comments. Chris Hedges, I've got a quote here. It's not very legible. I tried to improve it. It's up to, yeah, right there, the picture of the guy that one, yeah.
There.
Okay.
Go ahead and read that.
Yeah, I would be glad to. The purpose of bread and circuses is, as Neil Postman said in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is to distract, to divert emotional energy toward the absurd and the trivial and the spectacle while you are ruthlessly stripped of power. This has been going on for a long time. Instead of dealing with issues that really matter and can change people's lives, we have people turning on ourselves, making moral judgments about how we live our lives, rather than solving the problem. So, I mean, we've got big problems ahead of us. Climate change. I don't know about you, but my mortgage, the insurance going up, the value of my property going up, sustaining the cost of continuing to pay for your insurance premiums, especially in Colorado when you don't know when the next hailstorm is coming.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened with St. Andrew and the hailstorm and the new roof you all have.
Yeah.
But Smoky Hill got a new roof and we were probably dropped by our insurance coverage. And so finding another insurance carrier, we had like a 40% increase in our insurance premium. And so for all of you who are tithing out there and giving money to the church, I mean, right there's a 40% increase in a budget. That's keeping us from doing ministry and helping people, just to maintain a building. So there are bigger issues that we should be working together on without being at each other's throats over sexual orientation or with someone, being in a committed relationship for 25 years, like my partner and myself, So I think Chris Hedges is right. We have gotten sucked down this rabbit hole to where we're not going to win. They don't want us to win. So
we're turning against each other.
exactly.
It's an old ploy politically.
Right, and it's the same playbook that was used in Nazi Germany.
Turn in your neighbor.
Yeah, it's happening. So how do we recover our power? I'll admit, I was kind of scared to call this guy, who sent this letter.
He might have a gun.
Right, I mean, what kind of whack job is he or whatnot? So first thing I had to do was overcome my fear. And I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who said, speak your truth even when you're shaking. We got to find ways to speak our truth even when we're shaking and to have those hard conversations. My brother and sister-in-law are very conservative Baptists. They're Trump supporters. We don't talk like we used to. Can you imagine? Yeah. So my struggle now is trying to find ways to have conversations with them that I can get through. Because right now I'm persona non grata. And so every time I try to, and the two churches that I grew up in, who are kind of responsible for my theology and my outlook on things, both of those two churches have disaffiliated, and are part of the Global United Methodist Church or Global Methodist, whatever they're calling themselves now. So I literally, when I go back home to Missouri, there are people who cross the street who walk around me, because, and I'm like, what gives, I know you, I went to high school with you and whatnot. And part of it's my fault too, because I haven't been, there's been times I've pushed back and have not been graceful about it. But when we talk about winning hearts and minds over, what does that look like? Is it a matter of us just remaining silent and not having discussions with people we love and care for, who we call family and friends? So I kind of developed some guidelines. So first question I always ask myself, what do you want to have happen? 98% of all problems can be solved if you can answer this one question. The problem is a lot of times we don't know what we want to have happen. We may want people to get along, so we're not going to pick the fight. Or if we want to hold somebody accountable, how do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that gets through? That they come away with an understanding and you come away with an understanding. I mean, sometimes in my engagements with my brother and sister-in-law, I've come away with, yeah, they've got a point. Because, my brother was an electrician. There is no way that I could pass an electrician's exam. The code book is huge. Well, he's taken like 3 levels of those exams and he's passed them all. And if you want someone to wire your house, you would want him to do it. You would not want me with the degree in theology. So, and he's come right out and said, I'm just tired of you having a stick up your butt, thinking because you've got an education, you're better than I am. And I'm like, when have I ever said I'm better than you are? He said, every day. So, that's stung because he's my older brother and someone when you're a kid girl, that's what you look up to.
But is that his opinion? Obviously.
Obviously, it's how he
It's
feels.
his insecurity.
It's how he feels. So, but whether or not it's real or not, that's how he feels.
Right.
Real to him.
Right. Now, I will say that, when we came away from that conversation, we made up some ground. We've had our apologies and we've, said, it was interesting, NPR coming over here said, siblings are the people you can fight with. And you have a 90% chance of still, liking each other or, at least having dinner with each other.
Yeah.
There's other people that you can have these discussions with and arguments and you're done. I'm out of here. So my brother and I, we're still going to have dinner together. We're still going to celebrate birthdays and whatnot. But we need to find ways to talk. So I ask a lot of questions. I ask, well, John, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that? And then we need to get back to using I statements. Like I'm very intentional by saying, well, John, I love you. I care about you. Here's how I feel. Here's what I think. And I'm sorry you feel that way or think what you do. But here's how I see it. And then he'll listen.
Good.
I would just strongly discourage anyone from saying well, you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to get your crap together and you need to, immediately the walls come up when you use that language. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because one of the things I love about this church is how, I don't know how many psychologists are walking around here who totally get, you should be teaching this, But the idea of you owning
There's a you should.
Right. Busted. But this is a perfect example of how we hold people accountable. And we can do it with love in our hearts. We don't have to be mean. We don't have to be cruel. We don't have to be vindictive. We can own how we feel and then talk, which I think we need to do. Affirm all human dignity. When someone makes a racial slur or something, I suddenly get deaf. I'm like, excuse me, what did you say? Did you say what I just thought you said? Did you mean to say how this sounds? And immediately,
You're asking questions.
right. And then they're having to process. Well, I thought you were one of us. I thought you knew that, So that's huge. Huge. Because, and another piece to this too, in my journey, I've kind of adopted a lot of Quaker theology. And one of the things I love about Quakers is their circles and how they have groups to come together whenever someone has a problem. They get together and you listen. You just sit and listen. You don't tell them what they should do or what you think they should do. You just sit, listen, ask questions. And then the goal is for the person to discover for themselves, oh, this is what I need to do. Yeah, this is not a good deal.
Glenn, we've got
So-
5 minutes left. Just
Okay.
wanna give you the time check.
So the last piece to this, I love this, and this is something I learned from my AA and NA friends. Say what you mean what you say, but never be mean with what you say. I've heard the first two, I never heard the third one, you know?
It's a good way to say.
Somehow we've got to develop these skills. I think it is important for us to be nice, but I don't want being nice to mean we're a doormat.
Right.
You know, or that we're going to participate. And there's several things as a pastor I look for. You know, usually when people start coming up to me and they are complaining about other people, well, that backstabbing friend of mine, you know, I'm like, okay, who have you stabbed in the back lately? Sometimes we
Project.
well, it project big time, and we don't even know we're doing it. But 9 times out of 10, when we were complaining about others, it's usually something we got going on ourselves. And then the second thing is addiction. You know, understanding that we are a culture with lots of addiction. And it's not just drugs and alcohol. You know, anger is an addiction. You can get an endorphin rush off of being angry all the time. The people who he writes about, you know, the science of revenge. He calls that an addiction. You know, I'm going to show them, I'm going to tell them off. So, but at the end of the day, know that what you do here is good stuff. And we do need more St. Andrews congregations. We need more Smoky Hill congregations. We need more small congregations, which are finding it extremely hard to have the audio equipment, the technology, you know, to be cost effective. The cost of ministry is huge. Also, I just would like for you to give your support to all your pastor, everyone that's on staff, even if they're not a pastor. It's harder now than ever to do ministry. It's harder now than ever to try to meet the needs of what people are being asked for. We're all under a lot of pressure. But I would encourage you to breathe, take time off, understand that it's okay. And one thing I've learned about walking away for 25 years, you can always walk away from God. God's never going to walk away from you. Okay? And when you get ready, after you have caught your breath and you're ready to get back in it, it's still there. You know, there's still something to do. There's still someone to care about. There's still someone to love. There's still someone to make a difference. So this summer, take the vacation. It's okay to say no when you were asked. But when you're ready and you've got the resources and you think, hey, I can do this, go for it. So that's all I can say.
We just have a minute or two left. Any questions for Glenn? I know you should, but Gene first and then you.
Why you do it under a 2-minute warning? Glenn, can you be a futurist? Part of our conversation is the future of Methodists. First of all, why are you part-time? Number one. Number two, if you recall, in 1968, the Evangelical Brethren Church joined the Methodists and we became the United Methodist Church. We may still have some descendants in there, I'm not sure. The Methodist Church is made up of Baptists, Evangelicals, Nazarene, so on and so forth. Question B, number 2, for economies of scale and power, like-minded denominations, variety of denominations that share a similar similarity can work out governance issues. Do you see the future as merging denominations? Number 2. 3, do we have mega churches like St. Andrews and the Kansas City Church that become basilicas, sort of fonts, and out of which various kinds of ministries might emanate? 3 questions, please.
Well,
In 1 minute.
yeah, fortunately for everyone here, I'm not a bishop. But that's why we have a council of bishops. And that's one of the things I believe that they're looking at. And by having our book of discipline change, we are now more in alignment than ever with the Presbyterian Church and the Episcopal Church. I don't know why I'm having a block with that. Yeah. But yeah, and there's discussions about how to do ministry more effectively. I really, my heart is with rural congregations because there are a lot of rural areas that are not going to have or be able to afford having a church. And even in the urban areas, we've got a lot of churches that are closing and whatnot. There are more house churches. I think there's going to be more small cell groups doing Bible study together. I think I can see classes like this, where you go off and during the week, maybe you meet with other friends in small groups. Ministry is going to look totally different. It's also pretty astounding that we've got a new pope who's American.
Oh.
The last 2 popes are now from different countries. Rome has always had their hold on the pope, and they've always dictated what their vision is. So the Catholic Church, all denominations are changing. I think in my case, when the split started to happen, I was on a lot of chat groups with a lot of different people in small churches who were just heartbroken because they felt like they had to go with the global church rather than United Methodist. They didn't really want to go with the global church, but their friends, the relationships, everything they have are with the global church. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of people who may not agree with the theology of the global church, but they're going to that church because they have relationships there. We have a lot of other people who are like, I'm done. I'm not stepping foot in the door. What are we going to do to get them back?
Yeah.
So.
One more question, and then we have to go because another group comes in here at noon. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if I missed it. Did you say something about hold people accountable on your slide? You already did. Okay, I missed it then.
Yeah, and that's kind of why we're here. Part of what John Wesley was about in his small groups, you come together to pray for each other, to share your concerns, but there's also an accountability piece to this. And Wesley was not shy of saying, well, have you thought that your actions may be causing some of your problems? We have a tradition of that. This church has at one time, I know, small cell groups or small spiritual development groups where people come together and they pray for each other and they talk about and they hold each other accountable. I love the Quaker aspect, where Quakers come together and if there is an issue that someone is struggling with. And if I had my way about it, I think every Methodist church would have some kind of Quaker spirituality class. Because one of the things I think Quakers do really well, first of all, Judi Dench is a Quaker. I mean, that alone, as a gay man who loves theater. And yeah, she's a Quaker and she's wonderful. But the thing about it is they meet in these small groups. What is discussed in the group stays in the group. I don't know what they do if someone confesses to murder or whatnot. I don't know how far they take that. But the idea of having a safe place to where you can talk about what's going on in your life and in your heart is huge. And not have judgment. And then have people just ask questions. Okay, so your marriage is in trouble. What's going on? What does that look like? What do you mean when you say that? Is there anything you're doing to contribute to that? Is there anything you can do to change? You know, do you want the marriage to continue? Do you want the marriage to end? You know, and then they have to sit there and process it and think about it and decide what they want to have happen. And I really view our role as the church. We're kind of spiritual guides for each other. You know, Steve doesn't realize it or not, but one of the things I really value about our friendship is, you know, the entire time I've been here, he's always been chatting me up. We're friends on Facebook, and I read what he writes. He reads what I write, and you know, there are times I'm like, I mean, that comment about Benton, really, you know.
I said Thomas Hart Benton was a weird painter, and Glenn wrote back, he's a wonderful painter. He's terrific. He's the best in the world.
He's the best thing that came out of Missouri, you know.
There you go.
You know? There you go.
Not the
But, you know,
Chiefs.
We need to wrap up.
Yeah. So anyway, just in closing, friendships are important. Having people around you that you can talk to are important. Keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing here and let it grow.
Wonderful. This was very special. Thank you for being here. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Next week.
Yeah. Be here.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You want
Yeah.
to